The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, come on in, my friends, and pull up a chair. Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, looking at Bill W.'s Grapevine writings from 1944 to 1970 with our good friend and Take 12 Recovery Radio contributor, Chris S. Chris, hey, man, I missed you.
Well, I missed you, too. We've been absent for a couple of weeks. Life does have a way of getting in your way.
It does. And sometimes we move out of the way, and sometimes we go with the flow.
And sometimes we're asked to step up, and it interferes with the things that we normally do. And I know that has happened to you in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
You were talking before the show about just an incredible shift in one of the most successful organizations for alcoholism recovery that's ever existed, and you're part of that. And I really hope you're going to do a show or two on it, because what you're involved with right now has got me fascinated.
Yeah. Well, we definitely are. We do have, just for the listener's sake, we do have a podcast specifically dedicated to the Came to Believe recovery folks, which is broader than just working with the Salvation Army, but we do have that on the website at take12radio.com, and that broadcasts every Tuesday, and then, of course, you can listen to the archives. But we are going to be doing a couple of broadcasts specifically with some captains and some leadership from the Salvation Army. So I'll let you know. I'll keep you abreast on when that's going to happen.
That is really going to be something, I'm sure, when it happens.
Yeah, that'll be great. Well, what are we doing? What are we doing on this episode there, buddy?
All right, so we're going through the essays that Bill wrote in the Grapevine magazine. We're now at November 1961. Now, to put this in context, Monty, I'm 68 years old. I was in kindergarten when he wrote this. Just a little context.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's
called Again at the Crossroads. Bill is always assessing, the movement of Alcoholics Anonymous,
right,
and giving us warnings and telling us to pay attention to the history and the mistakes that have already been made, so that we don't have to continue to make them. And I kind of have a feeling that's what this is going to be about. But let's see. Let's dig in a little bit. Okay. Again at the Crossroads. We AAs are everywhere developing a keener sense of our history and the meaning of its turning points. Moreover, I believe that we are getting a right sense of our history, something of utmost importance indeed. The world's past reveals that many societies and nations have fallen victims to fear and pride, or to their aggressive designs. Thus, they lost their sense of meaning, purpose, and right destiny, and so they disintegrated and vanished. Neither power nor glory nor wealth could in the least guarantee their long-time survival. An interesting story was Bill was talking about the traditions to some AA member, and the AA member goes, "Oh yeah, what you're talking about, Bill, that happened to the Washingtonians." And Bill is like, "Who the heck are the Washingtonians.
Yeah.
So he dug into it a little bit. He pulled out his Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever, and he learned the demise of the Washingtonians, and it's because they lost their sense of meaning, purpose, and right destiny. They originally started as a group of people trying to stay separated from alcohol, and they ended up getting involved in all kinds of social issues that split the room in half, and so he intuitively knew we needed not to do that, and found good reason in the Washingtonians why it could happen. So it says here, there is little on the record of AA's first quarter of a century to suggest such a fate for us. In our personal lives, and therefore in our fellowship itself, we have steadily striven to lay aside all those vigorous clamors for prestige, power, and possessions, which has ruined so many of us in the drinking days. With those fearful experiences vividly before us, it is not strange that AA's 12 steps continue to remind us of the stark need for ego reduction, that our 12 traditions warn heavily against the perils of concentrated wealth, the vain pursuit of fame, and the ever-present temptation to controversy and attack. Because of the way the 12-step fellowships have been developed, Monty, it's probably rarer than one would expect that these kind of things happen. But I'm in the middle of something right now. So our home group meets in a church with like 4 other meetings that are not related to our home group. And the church has come to us and asked us to get insurance, which, that happens like 1 out of 10 places where you meet, the church will want insurance. And we looked into it. It's going to be like $400 or something. And rather than try to get all these groups in the same place to figure out what each of us owes, if we're going to get this insurance policy, we decided that we're going to move.
Oh,
and
my God.
you know what I mean? So we're so programmed to avoid controversy and conflict, and something like that, you just know it would be ripe for, well, you guys have more people than us, so you should pay more. It's going to be something like that. You know what I mean?
Lord.
So we found a new place, and we're probably going to trundle over there and have our group there. But that's just a current example of kind of the way a lot of us have been trained.
Sure. I want to reflect on this. Remind us of the stark need for ego reduction that our 12 traditions warn heavily against, the perils of concentrated wealth, the vain pursuit of fame, and the ever-present temptation to controversy and attack. I got to say it, and I'm going to be very careful here, but all you got to do is turn on the TV, and you're going to be smack in the dab of just that right there. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. Bingo.
Yeah, don't you know it? I'm a passionate follower of political things that are going on.
Me
right?
too.
So I probably do 4 or 5 hours a day of news broadcasts of one kind or the other. I hate even to admit that. You know what I mean? But I do. It's interesting to me, where we are as a country and what is going on.
Yeah.
And it seems to be getting worse. It really, there's always been factions. There's always been the left and the right. But it just seems to be at a boiling point
it's a different
now,
animal.
and if it gets much worse, I'm going to start to worry about civil war. You know what I mean?
You know what?
So,
if folks would just learn steps 10, 11, and 12, wouldn't this be a much better world?
I, Monty, I totally agree with that. I'm pretty embedded in 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah, me too.
And I've got to tell you, some of my dearest friends are on the other side of the aisle. Some of my dearest friends are on the
Yeah,
other side
me
of the aisle.
too. Me too.
And I wouldn't have it any other way. And I think there is a way that we can avoid
There is.
the controversy and the infighting and the if I'm right, you're wrong, and if you're wrong, I'm right, kind of a thing, and just kind of chill out a little bit.
If nothing
You know
else,
what I mean?
it is fascinating to watch. It is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, we have met the enemy, and they are us.
Yep. Yep.
And you learn that from the spiritual path. You learn that your problems aren't coming at you; they're coming from you.
Right.
And you learn that if you're disturbed about something, there's something wrong with you. And you learn these things, on the spiritual path, and that's very helpful
Yes.
for
Oh my
for
gosh.
having a calm perspective, don't you think?
Absolutely. People ask me, why are you laughing and why do you smile and why did you say you sleep well at night? Well, these things bother me. They sometimes I get a little angry, but not to the point where it knocks me off my center. It's just not. It's like, I can yell at the TV and then be okay.
Yeah. Our anger is very short-lived when
It
it
is.
does rear its ugly head.
It is. Thank God.
We did not come to such wisdom by reason of our virtues. Our better understanding is rooted in our former follies. In the nick of time and by God's grace, each of us has been able to develop a growing sense of the meaning and purpose of his own life. Because this has been the essence of our individual experience, it is also the essence of our experience as a fellowship. We have suffered enough to learn something of the love of God and of each other. Thus, we have been taught to choose those principles and practices by which we can surely survive and grow. This is the spiritual climate in which we AAs are today privileged to live. Even our sometimes erratic behavior since sobriety has never changed this all-pervading climate of humility and love. We think is the spiritual condition which has invited into our midst so much wise and providential guidance. We say this is in no conceit. It is an obvious fact of our experience. We only need to ponder the long series of apparently correct choices that we have been enabled to make over the past 26 years. Choices respecting our principles and right methods of communicating them. Not a single one of these major decisions has yet shown the slightest sign of being a mistake. Up to now, AA seems to have taken the right turning at each new crossroads. This could scarcely have been done by our doing alone. Our fellowship has afforded a convincing proof of that wise old adage which declares that man's extremity is God's opportunity. This being our record, we can surely face the next hour of decision in confident faith. So as we're going through this book, I'm really seeing the evolution in Bill's perspective. And where he was worried in some of the earlier articles in the 40s and some of the ones in the 50s, he seems to have gained real confidence in God's hand guiding this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous to the best effect. Don't you think?
I think so. I think he had some valid concerns because it was young. But like you said, watching the evolution of this thing unfold and watching how God's taking care of it every step of the way, despite our foibles,
which can be many. We can have many foibles.
Many brings comfort, especially to, for lack of a better term, the father of the newborn. You know what I mean? I mean, we know it was Bill and Bob and all these other characters, but Bill he's kind of the worrywart, and he's been kind of tasked by God to be that guy, to bring the needs before the Creator and so forth. So he's going to have a perspective of the parent, I think. And I think as our children grow up, we become less and less concerned for them. We go through phases though, right? They'll reach adolescence and then we're really worried. And then they kind of grow out of some of that stuff and we're not so worried. And then they get their first mortgage. Then we're really worried. And then, but as we go, we get less and less concerned and we're able to sleep better.
Yeah. For a while, it's like they calling you up for bail money.
I know.
and then slowly it's like mortgage advice.
Right.
Things do change for the better usually, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
The fact is that AA does now stand at a new turning point in its affairs. This has to do with the future world service leadership of AA as a whole. Therefore, we shall have to take a new look at the shape of things to come. At this particular crossroads, a crucial decision is required of me, and here it is. It is my conviction that I should now retire from all active management of AA World Service Affairs and that my leadership in these matters should be fully transferred to the trustees of AA's General Service Board.
Bam.
Wow. And that's in squiggly font. So Bill did do this. Now, there's some backstory that I got from some delegates and people who know a lot more about the inner workings of General Service than I ever will. And this was so Bill didn't 100% willingly do this. Is the story that I've heard. Mm-hmm. He made an accommodation because there were certain other things that he felt were important, and it was a negotiation. And one of the things that was important to Bill was, for a long time, the non-alcoholic board members outnumbered the alcoholic board members.
Sure.
And Bill felt that should shift. That the alcoholics can now take care of themselves and they should be the majority on the board. So that had a little bit to do, the story I heard, that had a little bit to do with his decision to stop calling the shots. Now, I don't think he ever gave up his office, and I don't think anybody ever stopped asking him for advice. But the decision making was definitely now not something he could directly influence. He could indirectly influence it, but he couldn't directly influence it. And I think that's all to the good because within 10 years he would be dead. From writing this article. So he saw stuff coming. He always saw stuff coming, and he prepared for it.
Yeah.
This is not all a new concept. It is simply the last step in a play which has been in development for more than 10 years. It was in mind when in 1948 Dr. Bibe and I jointly wrote an article for the Grapevine which was called, "Why Can't We Join AA Too?" It was even more in mind when our first General Service Conference was experimentally assembled in 1951, and when at St. Louis in 1955, the full authority and responsibility for the maintenance of World Service was transferred to our conference. My retirement from active service leadership was definitely foreshadowed. Yet a vestige of my old-time status remains, and this should be explained. Following the St. Louis transference, there were a few tasks that still required my full attention, but these are now virtually completed. During the last 6 years, I have, respecting these particular matters, exercised a joint leadership with our trustees. This sustained activity has no doubt tended to confirm me in the minds of many AAs as a continuing fact and symbol of AA leadership worldwide. This is the last remainder of my service leadership. For this action, there are excellent and even compelling reasons. The basic one is the present need to strictly apply AA's Tradition 2 to every area of our World Service operation. This means that I should no longer act in service leadership for the group conscience of AA. This must now become fully the function of our trustees, as guided by the conference delegates. Consider, too, AA's very healthy tradition of rotating leadership. Everywhere today, this is strictly applied principle, excepting to me. This is a leftover inconsistency that ought to be eliminated by my own retirement to the sidelines, where practically all the AA old-timers now are. Now it's funny. I want to jump back here. It basically says that the leadership of AA may now become fully the function of our trustees, as guided by the delegates. All right, the delegates are the people that are elected in the different areas, right? The trustees are board members. You know, they're voted in by the board votes in the board members.
Yeah.
Now, what I see that concerns me today within Alcoholics Anonymous is I'm not fully convinced that the trustees are 100% accepting of direction from the delegates.
Yeah.
Who should be getting direction from the DCMs and GCRs, and should be getting direction from the groups. You know, not the whole problem isn't just New York. The problem is, you know, participation in this structure. There's so few people that actually do, but I worry about, you know, Bill's vision, his pure vision of what AA, how AA is supposed to operate. That it's maintaining that. I'm not convinced that it is today.
You know, Chris. In most organizations, people resign to the fact that and agree that, you know, good stuff as well as bad stuff rolls downhill. And so, you know, it starts at the top, and if you got a CEO with a bad attitude, you're probably going to have some board members with bad attitudes and secretaries, all right down to the janitor. I mean, we kind of know that, right?
Yeah.
In Alcoholics Anonymous, because of the so-called upside down triangle, I say that tongue in cheek, it goes the other way. And so when we're talking about little participation in things like this, I see the problem right in the local group, where you hear members say, well, I'm not going to the business meeting. All they do is fight and argue. It's just stupid. Why? I mean, I don't need that to stay sober. I mean, you know, they just miss the point completely. So they don't go, or maybe they went once or twice and that was it. And so from basic membership all the way to the delegates, to the trustees, etc., you have this bad attitude because they don't understand the service structure. They don't understand the concepts of service any more than they understand the 12 steps and how to apply and implement the spiritual disciplines in their life. If they don't understand how to apply these 12 steps, how in the world do we expect them to even give a hoot about what's going on in New York? You know, I talk to people all the time about this stuff, and they look at me like, I don't have time for that. I don't want to hear that.
We don't talk about that at our group. You know?
Yeah. There's a guy that I love and respect highly who's really deeply involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we talked about plain language, big book. He goes, I don't want to talk about that. Just leave that alone. Leave that out of it. I don't want, And that concerns me, buddy.
I have the character defect of paying a lot of attention. you know what I mean? Like, and that can be good, and that can be bad. I could be blissfully ignorant, but that's just not in my nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I just said so. One guy asked me, he says, "Why do you care?" And I said, "Look, if nothing else, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating to watch." And I don't know. Maybe I'm just sick in the head. But to watch these things unfold on a regular basis and go to these conferences and listen to these, I scratch my head sometimes, and other times I'm like, yeah, right on. You know what I mean? But it's fascinating, nevertheless.
It is. It is. But this is not all. My continued activities at AA headquarters may be covering up unforeseen flaws in our organizational structure. These should be given an opportunity to reveal themselves if they exist. Moreover, the excellent leadership that we now have among the trustees and in the headquarters should be allowed to operate without further consideration, collaboration with me. We know that in the long run, double-headed management is highly unsound. My retirement from active service would cure this defect. There are also psychological reasons of the deepest import. AA is very much a family, of which we elders have surely been the spiritual parents. Now the parents, you were talking about this earlier, now the parent who quits before his family has arrived at the age of responsibility has unquestionably forsaken his trust. But the parent who far overstays his time can be extremely damaging too. If he insists on continuing his parental authority and the protective custody of his wards well after they have reached the age of responsibility, he is simply robbing them of the spiritual privilege of facing life on their own. What was perfectly right for their infancy and adolescence becomes strictly no good for their maturity. So the wise parent always changes his status accordingly. Of course, he is still one who, if asked, will lend a hand in serious emergencies, but he knows that he simply must let his heirs make and repair most of their own mistakes, live their own lives, and grow up. Tradition 2 of the AA program deeply recognizes this universal truth when it declares, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. You were talking about this exactly earlier.
Yeah,
Monty,
what a trip.
A parent-child relationship.
Yeah.
And how we have to take our grubby hands off at a certain point, or else we're really stunting someone's growth.
Yeah.
I think that's what Bill is trying to do here.
Yeah.
Of course, I am not suggesting a complete withdrawal. I propose to change my relationship with AA. For example, I expect to be available at trustee and conference meetings. Should marked defects appear in our present service structure, I shall, if asked, be very happy to aid in the work of repair. In short, I expect to be on tap, but never again on top.
Wow.
This being precisely the stance that AA hopes all its old-timers will take. And, he talks in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions about the elder statesman and the bleeding deacon.
Yeah.
This is kind of an example of him trying to just be an elder statesman. My coming shift to the sidelines will necessarily involve other changes, save for the possibility of a future visit or two overseas and my attendance at whatever international conventions there may be. I think that my days of traveling and speaking are over. Practically speaking, it is no longer possible for me to respond to the hundreds of invitations that now come in. It is very clear, too, that continued appearances would increase my prominence in AA at the very time this should greatly diminish. There is much the same situation respecting my very large correspondence, which has grown so far out of hand that I can no longer do it justice. Nevertheless, one primary channel of communication still stands wide open, my writing for the Grapevine. This I would certainly like to continue. Just for now, for example, I'm doing a series of articles entitled Practicing These Principles in All Our Affairs. Maybe these pieces can later be expanded into a full-size book which would try to deal with the whole problem of living as seen by us AAs. If it turns out that I can write it, such a volume might be of permanent value. Wow, so I, I'm not sure that volume was ever finished. It might have ended up in some Grapevine articles, but wouldn't that be an interesting book?
Don't you think that he may be referring to the whole emotional sobriety thing that he never
Yes, I do.
He never really had a chance to really launch?
really expound on it and really highlight it as our next spiritual hurdle,
Right.
because that's what he believed emotional sobriety was.
Yeah, the next frontier.
Our healthy release of attachments.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that book was ever written. Maybe pieces of it ended up here and there. But if it's in the archive somewhere, someone should grab a hold of it and publish it, because I'd certainly be interested in hearing it.
I think the closest thing to it is that the letter that he wrote to his depressed friend on emotional sobriety. I mean, we've got that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's been floating around for quite some time, but and there's a lot of people that Dr. Berger, some of these other guys really have become the gurus of emotional sobriety, and have done it justice. But man, I would like to see more stuff that Bill wrote on it if it's there.
Nobody's better than Alan Berger on that.
Oh man, that guy has got it.
Isn't he great?
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah.
Wow. All right, so there is another factor that bears upon my decision. Like every AA member, I have a definite responsibility to become a citizen of the world around me, to channel into the experience of living and working, which has been mine in our fellowship. Therefore, I'm already exploring certain areas of outside activity in which I may be able to make a helpful and possibly a meaningful contribution. For the first time, I now feel at liberty to follow the constructive example already set by uncounted numbers of my fellow members. But of course, my principal reason for taking this new direction is the deep and confident belief that this will prove to be in the best long-time interest of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some of the things he got involved with, he got heavily involved in vitamin B therapy. Mm-hmm. He got heavily involved with his friend Axman and some of the other people who were doing spiritual retreats and really trying to seek a deep experience with God, outside of AA, in the spiritual world.
Yeah.
And maybe he wanted time to be able to do that. And I think he certainly deserved it. But again, I don't think he ever gave up his desk there at Riverside Avenue.
Yeah.
It scarce needs be said that I approached this new crossroads for AA and for me with a lump in my throat and with a heavy heart full of gratitude for all those unexampled privileges and gifts which I have so long been blessed. Man, what a selfless act. He's basically saying, I've been in charge for 26 years. It's not good for the fellowship for one person to be doing that.
And it probably wasn't good for his own health.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
I'm sure it wasn't.
There's a time when the page turns and it's okay. There's different chapters. And I mean, he certainly was the author of the majority of the books. I say that figuratively speaking. But man, and this page is turning. I wonder if some of that, if he didn't look in the mirror sometimes, if I was a fly on the wall and say, oh, I'm glad this is moving in another direction.
I've got, he was an example for me because, I've read all this stuff years and years ago. And I had the opportunity to be the principal founder of an AA home group. And I packed it with my sponsees and friends in the beginning. And it grew into this monstrous home group where people come from 4 different states every Tuesday night to this home group because it was different. It was a big book presentation group, and it was a learning and doing group, and that just didn't exist at that time. So it became interesting. A lot of people came just to see what was going on. A lot of people stayed because they experienced what was going on. And I was the leader of this group, and I'm sitting up in front of everybody teaching out of the big book for 2 years. I did it just me, and I started to get the feeling that this wasn't good. There were a number of people that maybe they couldn't do as good a job of me as I did, right? But they could certainly do a decent job of presenting the big book. And I'm making all the decisions. I'm deciding where the money goes. I'm figuring out who the coffee maker was. I mean, I was making it easy for everybody, but that's just not the way Alcoholics Anonymous is set up. So I started divesting myself. First I divested myself of the main speaker position. And then we put a steering committee together who would do the booking. And then one by one, I passed on my group responsibilities to other people until all I was an AA member in that AA group. And this was sometime around 2001. And I'm really glad that I did that. I really am. I've seen people who've started home groups and who've kept their foot on the throttle and their hand on the steering wheel like forever, right? And it doesn't end well.
Yeah.
You can see a real unhealthy ego at work. You can see power driving. You can see character defects attached to that kind of a thing, and I was able to escape most of those pitfalls by
Right.
stepping back and believing in rotation, believing that rotation means me too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Monty?
Yeah, I do. Well, that's wisdom, my friend. So if you're listening and you've been chairing that meeting for 15 years, hey, we laugh, but there are some folks.
Oh, I can imagine.
Oh,
Time
man.
for inventory.
Yes, do a group inventory.
And sponsorship where you're accountable to somebody.
There you go.
It's time for that.
Yeah. Well, listen, next week, the article is Responsibility is Our Theme. That's the name of the article that Bill writes for the Grapevine in 1965. Stay tuned at the very end of the show here when the bumper music plays out, because we'll let you know how you can catch up on every episode. I think this is 86 now. We're rounding the corner. We really are.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. And it as always, it is a treat and an honor to have you on and doing this with us, my friend. And we will see you next week.
Excellent. Thank you, Monty.
All right. Until our next broadcast, my friends, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. Bye-bye now. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
This has been a Chicken and a Pig production.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.